Jesus gave to his disciples a commandment that was new. Show my love to one another, do as I have done for you. All the world will know you love me as you love each other too.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. From the Gospel for this day, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another." Now there's no suggestion anywhere that this new commandment was meant only for those few disciples who were gathered there with Jesus at that last meal. So these words, this new commandment from Jesus, is meant for us as well. But as we seek to incorporate this word, this new commandment of Jesus, into our lives, we begin by making sure that we have a clear understanding of what Jesus considered his love to consist of. He says for us to love one another as he has loved us. What does that love that he's shown to us consist of? I suppose we could give a lot of answers to that, but from the text today, there are two things, I believe. His love consisted, first of all, of humble service. And this was demonstrated in his washing his disciples' feet. Now, we don't do that so much anymore. We don't wear sandals and trudge dusty roads and enter into someone's house and have a servant come and wash our feet. We don't do that. And so what might be an equivalent of that kind of humble service that Jesus exercised? And the best I could come up with was that instead of washing someone's feet, an equivalent would be washing the bottoms of the ill, or the aged, or the paraplegic who cannot do it for themselves. Whether that kind of humble service is performed by a spouse, or another family member, or a hospital or nursing home aide, washing another's bottom is loving, holy work. It is the kind of work Jesus would have done. One commentator on this text wrote this: "No one is more important in the kingdom of God than the one who needs love and care. And the one who provides that love or care, whatever it might happen to be, is one who loves as Jesus loved, is one who exercises humble service." The first verse of today's gospel reading. "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Jesus' love consisted of humble service, but also of loving us to the end, that is, loving us to death. The righteous one, the guiltless one, the one who had done no wrong, died for the unrighteous, died for the guilty, died for ones who are full of wrong. Jesus loved you and me to the end. He loved us to death. Those are the two things from this text that I get. It consists in Jesus' love. When he says, love one another as I have loved you. That's what his love consisted of. Humble service and loving us to death. The end to which he loved us. The humble service of dying weak and bleeding and naked in public view. That love is before our very eyes. That love is in our hearing. That love is on our tongues and our lips in the sacred meal that he's left us. From the epistle, Paul writes, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." The Lord's death there in the meal. The Lord's death, that is his humble service. His loving us to the end. His loving us to death. Is right here before us. We see it. We hear it in the words of promise. We place it on our tongues and on our lips. And this Lord's death, this humble service, this love, we proclaim, Paul says. We not only proclaim it, that love, but we embrace it. We embrace it because of our certain failures and our certain refusals to obey the new commandments that Jesus has given us. And so for those failures and refusals, for those less than loving attitudes, words, speech, acts, those less than loving things, we bring with us in our open hands to the meal. We bring them in our open hands to give to Jesus and to receive from him his love. His love of humble service, his loving us to the end, his loving us to death. Amen. Service continues with the choir. sequence of the Holy Week events, according to St. John, are somewhat different from how the events are reported by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. According to John's account, the Last Supper, the meal at which Jesus washed the disciples' feet, was the gospel for last evening, took place in some unidentified home or room. He doesn't even identify it as an upper room. He just tells the fact of that meal and the foot washing. After he washed the disciples' feet, Judas left to make arrangements with the Jewish authorities for Jesus' arrest. And then Jesus gave his new commandment to those remaining disciples there with him. And after that, he then foretold Peter's triple denial that he would do. The following chapter then in John's account is where Jesus spends time giving instruction and teaching to the disciples, and apparently they're still in that same room where the supper took place and the foot washing. And at the end of that chapter, then Jesus says to the disciples, "Rise, let us go from here." He doesn't say where they were going to go to, but just from there. And again, apparently from that same room where the supper and the foot washing took place. And then, as John records it, there are two more chapters where it's basically Jesus speaking to the disciples, giving them instructions and teaching. John doesn't tell us where this takes place. All he'd said previously was, "Let us go from here." And so apparently maybe they're on the way walking and Jesus teaching them and instructing them. That goes on for 2 full chapters in John's Gospel. And then the next chapter is, again, a relatively long chapter that records Jesus' high priestly prayer. That's the prayer where he said he prays not only for these disciples, but for those who will follow and will believe on their witness and so forth. And pretty long prayer. But again, we're not told where Jesus speaks this prayer. Is he with the disciples? Do they stop along the way somewhere? Are they walking? We're not told. But then finally, 3 chapters after they had left the room where the Last Supper and the foot washing took place, finally, John records these words of Jesus. When Jesus had spoken these words, and there were a lot of words that he had spoken to that point. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out. But again, John doesn't tell us out from where. It just says he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. That's the opening verse of the Passion according to St. John that we heard a little bit ago. And it's from that point on where everything else took place, after they crossed the Kidron Valley, after this lot of instruction and teaching on Jesus' part for the disciples. But if we back up a little bit, a part of the conversation after they had left the room of the Last Supper and foot washing, and before they came to the Kidron Valley to go into the garden, in that time in there, John records these words of Jesus. "These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." Jesus speaks at this point of his joy. What in the world is Jesus' joy at this point? He knows that he is about to be crucified. That's not a peaceful way to die. He was to be crucified for the sins of the world. Certainly a heavy, heavy burden. how could he find room within himself for joy? For joy with the cross and all that led up to it. With all of that in sight, how in the world could Jesus say to these disciples as they're on the way to his cross that he had joy? I've spoken these things to you that my joy may be in you. I remember being told some time ago, a long time ago actually, of an interview. I'm told that this actually happened. It's not a made up story, but I can't verify that. But anyway, this woman, an older woman, who had a passel of children, and as I recall, they were all boys. That because she had so many children, and again, I don't recall the number, and probably because they were all boys, that made her somewhat unique, and so she had an interview, and again, I can't remember if it was newspaper or TV or radio, but anyway, she was interviewed by this person. And in the course of that interview, the interviewer said, it really must be difficult to love all those children the same. And she responded, oh, I don't love them all the same. And the interviewer, somewhat taken aback, said, really? Well, which one do you love the most? And the woman responded, the one who's sick until he's well, the one who's away until he's home. By completing, by finishing his Father-assigned task, namely his cross and death, we are made well. We are brought home. And knowing that is what gave Jesus joy as he walked even to his cross. You and I made well and brought home by Jesus' innocent suffering and death. You and I are his joy. Amen.
Amen.
We pray the bidding prayer as printed in your worship book.